My name is Evelyn Hart, and I was 63 years old when this story began, a time in life when I believed peace was something you could finally earn. After decades of work as a forensic bookkeeper, I had retired 2 years earlier. I filled my mornings with gardening and quiet reading, and my evenings with gentle arguments over documentaries with my husband, Michael. We had been married for 11 years. We were both on our second marriages, both determined to build something calm after years of turbulence. Michael's family, however, well, that was another matter entirely. They were loud, competitive, a little entitled in ways they themselves didn't quite recognize. His sister, Tara, in particular treated money like air, infinite and meant to be inhaled without thought. And his mother, Lorraine, was the type who made everything dramatic, whether it was a birthday brunch or a grocery list. I didn't dislike them. I simply kept a polite, cautious distance. Over the years, they developed a strange habit, asking Michael for money in a way they pretended was casual, yet always expected him to agree. And Michael, being the soft-hearted man he is, often did. I never interfered unless it affected our joint financial planning. I believed in boundaries, but I also believed a spouse shouldn't be forced into battles that belonged between siblings. Still, I kept an eye on things. Old habits from my accounting career die hard. I monitored our accounts monthly, not because I distrusted him, but because oversight was simply my way. And that oversight was what made me notice something curious in early spring: a few aborted attempts from an online travel agency, all flagged as insufficient verification. They were small, under $100, but they caught my attention. When I asked Michael about them, he stared at the screen with the same confusion I felt. "I didn't book anything," he said. "Maybe they're test charges?" It was plausible, but something about them unsettled me. A few weeks later, Michael's family group chat, one I rarely participated in, began buzzing more than usual. Trips, resorts, cruises, discussions about passports. Whenever I walked into the room, Michael clicked his phone off as if instinctively protecting me from the noise of it all. He wasn't hiding anything. He was simply overwhelmed by their constant talking. Still, a knot formed somewhere below my ribs, subtle but persistent. Looking back, I realize my instincts were whispering. I simply wasn't listening closely enough. Because before long, the whisper would become a shout, and the shout would become a $32,000 explosion that shook the foundation of my marriage, my patience, and my trust. And although I didn't know it yet, that quiet little foreshadowing, a few tiny suspicious charges, was the first ripple in a storm that would demand every ounce of strength, intelligence, and ethical cunning I had ever developed. By the end of it, I would recover not only my money, but my dignity. I would expose a truth they never expected me to uncover. And I would do it without raising my voice once. But the beginning felt like an innocent oversight. Until the day the real charges came through. Until the day I saw $32,487.19 vanish from my credit card in a single afternoon. And until the day Michael's family looked at me, wide-eyed, performatively confused, and said, "Oh, you didn't agree to pay for it?" That was when everything changed. The afternoon it happened was deceptively calm. I had spent the morning pruning the rose bushes, listening to a podcast about art theft. I came inside around 2, washed my hands, made tea, and opened my laptop to check a receipt for a recent online order. And that's when I saw it. A flashing red notification on my credit card dashboard. Unusually high activity detected. That phrase alone didn't terrify me. It had triggered before when I bought appliances or prepaid insurance. But when I clicked, the world tilted. $9,800 to Royal Coast Cruises. $6,247 to Intercontinental Caribbean Resorts. $4,932 for airfare to St. Lucia. $2,199 for excursions and charter activities. $9,309 assorted remaining travel items. All within the same 90-minute window. All approved under my name. All charged to my card. My hands didn't shake, I'm not that type of woman. But I did feel my chest tighten, as if someone had taken a fistful of air from the room. I called the credit card company immediately. "Mrs. Hart, can you confirm these are legitimate purchases?" "No," I said. "I absolutely cannot." They began the fraud reversal process. They closed my card. They assured me I wouldn't be held responsible pending investigation. But of course, I wanted to know who had done it. Because fraud isn't random when the charges fit someone's exact fantasy itinerary. I opened the family group chat, the one I usually ignored. Messages flooded the screen. Photos of beaches. Links to resorts. Talk of cruises. Then the message that chilled me. "It's booked." From Tara. Another message followed. "Thank you again for covering the reservation, Ev. We'll pay you back in little chunks, promise." Can't believe this is happening. My pulse went silent, as if my body had forgotten how to react. They used my card. They assumed I'd just absorb it. And not one of them, not Tara, not his mother, not his brother, had called me. Not one had asked. Not one had checked. They simply treated me as their walking wallet. I closed the laptop slowly. Intentionally. Because anger is a fire, but my fire burns inward, not outward. Michael came home an hour later. I showed him the charges silently. His face went white. Not guilty, stunned. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to you, Evelyn, I didn't know they did this." He grabbed his phone and confronted the group chat. Tara replied instantly. "Relax. The reservations are made. We can sort money later." Lorraine chimed in. "Evelyn has always been generous. This trip is important for family bonding." Another message. "It's not a big deal unless she makes it one." And then. "Don't be dramatic. The charges already went through." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, a clarity, a precision, the same sensation I felt years ago when poring over financial fraud cases. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was entitlement. Calculated entitlement. And if they thought I was just going to swallow it, they had forgotten one critical fact about me. I spent 30 years investigating financial manipulation. I could dismantle their entire scheme with the same calmness I pruned my roses. But first, I needed to understand how deep this betrayal truly ran. Because charges don't magically appear. Someone had obtained my card details. Someone had knowingly used them. And someone in that family, believed I would let it go. They were wrong. To understand how Michael's family reached the point of taking a $32,000 vacation on my credit card without permission, you need to know where they came from, and how I fit into their world. Michael grew up in a household where financial boundaries simply didn't exist. His father died young, and his mother, Lorraine, raised 3 children on a patchwork of jobs, assistants, and whatever she could persuade others to contribute. Survival made her resourceful, but it also made her skilled at emotional leverage. Michael escaped the earliest. He enlisted in the Navy, built a career, built discipline. He learned responsibility the hard way. But his siblings, they remained caught in that old family dynamic, expecting someone stronger to bail them out. When Michael met me in our 50s, after we had both survived divorces that drained us emotionally and financially, he told me he admired my self-sufficiency. I admired his gentleness. But his family? They struggled to understand women like me. To them, I was quiet, reserved, and a little too serious, as Tara liked to say. I wasn't flashy. I didn't gossip. I didn't indulge in petty competition. But I paid my bills, maintained my investments, and lived carefully. And in their minds, careful equaled wealthy, and wealthy equaled available. Over the years, I saw hints. The time they invited themselves on our weekend getaway and forgot to book their room. The time they added items to our grocery cart while pretending not to notice. The time Tara borrowed my Amazon login and ordered herself skin care, insisting it was a mistake. Small things. But patterns always start small. Michael would apologize for them, genuinely, but he couldn't see the manipulation the way I could. I had spent my life tracing patterns of financial exploitation, often woven subtly between emotional threads. I recognized the signs before they grew roots. Except this time, I hadn't realized how bold they'd become. In late spring, I started noticing little comments in the group chat. Tara, Evelyn travels so much. She must have points. His mother, she has good credit. That's the advantage of marrying someone smart. His brother, Nate, Ev has that premium card. Doesn't it include travel perks? She should use it if she's coming with us. Except, of course, I was never invited on this trip. Not once. The plan was always, them traveling, me funding. It started making sense when I dug through past conversations. They had been discussing a luxury cruise for months. But the topic always skirted around money, as if they were waiting for a benefactor to reveal themselves. And then I remembered something crucial. A few months prior, during a holiday gathering, Tara had asked to borrow my laptop to print tickets for her kids' school play. I handed it over without thinking. She could easily have seen the auto-filled card information saved in my browser from a recent purchase. She could have copied it. She had been alone in the room for nearly 20 minutes. I didn't have proof yet, but I had a strong hunch. Still, motive mattered more than method right now. They expected me to fund this trip because, in their minds, I fit the role of the financially stable matriarch with a bottomless well. They believed entitlement was the same thing as inheritance. They believed marriage tied my resources to their convenience. But they didn't understand me at all. I never react immediately. I never accuse without evidence. I never make assumptions without verification. I had built a life, a career, and a reputation on measured observation. And now, I intended to use every tool I had to uncover exactly how, and why, they believed they could steal from me with impunity. Because this wasn't just about money. Money can be replaced. Trust, however. Trust, once broken, leaves fragments that never fully disappear. And I was ready, not for revenge in the hot, dramatic sense they might have imagined, but for justice. A quiet, unstoppable, meticulously documented justice. The next morning, I woke with a clear head and a plan. Emotional reactions blur details. But once the fog lifted, I became myself again, the woman who had spent decades untangling messes caused by arrogance and sloppy deception. I began with documentation. I downloaded every charge, every timestamp, every merchant API record from my credit card's backend. As a former forensic bookkeeper, I still had connections and software that allowed me to extract metadata most consumers never see: the IP address of the booking device, the browser type, even fragments of auto-filled fields. The first significant detail emerged instantly. All of the transactions originated from the exact same IP address. Tara's home network. The second detail came from the travel agency's invoice logs. The billing profile used the email, ifheart.travel@, not my email. Not even close. A fake one designed to look legitimate. When I called the agency to inquire, I learned something even more revealing. The person who booked said you were unavailable to confirm, but that she was your authorized user. Interesting phrasing. Not wife of the cardholder, or relative, but authorized user, a term only someone familiar with credit structures would use. During the same call, the agent mentioned something that nearly made me smile. They wanted us to waive the verification call because the card owner was over 60 and not comfortable with technology. Ah. A convenient little stereotype used to justify their fraud. Then came the third piece of evidence. The agency provided the reservation notes, internal, not usually shared, but I requested them under the suspicion of identity fraud. There it was. Sister-in-law, Tara, confirming on behalf of E. Hart. She hadn't even tried to conceal her name. The stupidity of it would have been laughable if it weren't so insulting. Next, I examined our security camera logs. When Tara visited a few weeks prior, under the guise of dropping off a birthday card, she stayed inside for 7 minutes longer than necessary. Enough time to slip into my home office, where my laptop sat open on the desk. I wasn't impulsive, but even I had to close my eyes for a moment at the realization. She had used my trust, thin as it was, to access my financial information. By noon that day, I had assembled a dossier of evidence that could withstand any legal scrutiny. But I didn't want court. Not yet. Court was a last resort, the kind of hammer you save until the very end. I wanted them to reveal themselves first. To lie. To double down. To show me, in their own words, precisely how far they were willing to go. Because nothing strengthens justice like someone confidently digging their own hole. I joined the family group chat for the first time in months and typed. I noticed some unusual travel charges. Who booked the trip? The typing bubbles appeared immediately. Tara, oh no. Did the agency show it on your card? It's just temporary. We'll sort it. Lorraine, don't stress, dear. Families share. And it was already in motion. Nate, we thought you'd be excited. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. Excited. Excited to fund a trip I wasn't invited to. I asked one more question. Who entered my card information? The chat went silent. Absolutely silent. Not a single reply for almost 10 minutes. Then Tara finally responded. It must have autofilled when we looked at options at your house. No one did anything intentionally. And there it was, the lie I needed. The lie that proved intent. Because autofill doesn't magically jump from one laptop to another. And definitely not across state lines. I took screenshots. Every message. Every timestamp. My investigation wasn't just complete. It was airtight. Now it was time for the next phase. The truth. I waited until everyone was available, verified by the group chat's little green dots, before I revealed what I had found. Not with anger. Not with accusations. But with controlled, measured clarity. I typed. I reviewed the booking records. The travel agency provided logs. The charges came from Tara's home IP address. Typing bubbles appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. Tara, I have no idea how that happened. I continued. The agency also confirmed that you identified yourself as my authorized user. And the email used was not mine. Another pause. Then Lorraine intervened. Evelyn, you're overreacting. We were simply trying to plan a family trip before it became too expensive. You have the means. We don't. There it was. The real motive. The truth behind all the excuses. I responded. Means do not equal permission. Nate chimed in next, trying a different tactic, the guilt angle. You and Michael don't have kids. This trip was meant to bring us all together. Why are you being so rigid about money? It's just credit. Just credit. Spoken like someone who had never paid a large balance in his life. I let their messages sit for a moment, watching the desperation build. They hadn't expected me to confront them with evidence. They had expected passivity, maybe a lecture, maybe a sigh. Not a forensic breakdown. Finally, I typed. The charges were reversed. The trip is cancelled. Chaos erupted. A flurry of frantic, angry messages. Tara, what? You cancelled it? After everything we planned? Nate, you should have talked to us first. Lorraine, this is vindictive, Evelyn. We were counting on this. Counting on my wallet. Counting on my silence. I replied with the steady calm of a woman who has already won. You committed credit card fraud. The bank is conducting an investigation. They have your names, your logs, and your booking data. Silent again. No excuses. No spinning. No shifting blame. Then Michael wrote, finally stepping in. What you did was illegal. And you put my wife in a terrible position. You owe her an apology. Tara responded. You're taking her side? And Michael, bless him, replied. Her side? There is only one side when fraud is committed. That was the moment the entire house of cards began to collapse. Because his family wasn't expecting him to choose what was right. They assumed he would choose blood over truth. They underestimated his integrity, and mine. I sent one final message that evening. I am gathering all documentation for our records. We will discuss next steps after the bank concludes their review. No threats. No name-calling. Just facts. And facts, delivered without anger, carry a weight that emotional outbursts never can. But the real confrontation, the one that mattered, was still ahead. In person. Face to face. Where their performances couldn't hide behind screens. And I was ready. We met at Lorraine's house the following Saturday. I insisted on neutral ground. Michael supported me fully. The tension in the living room was thick enough to cut, though the three of them did their best to appear innocent. Tara was pacing. Nate stood with his arms folded. Lorraine sat perched on the couch like she was preparing for a courtroom drama. I remained standing. Calm. Straight-backed. Controlled. Michael stood beside me, not towering or aggressive, just present, which was enough. I began without theatrics. I'm here to present the facts and give you an opportunity to acknowledge what happened. Tara rolled her eyes. We already said it was a misunderstanding. I opened the folder in my hand. Inside were printed records, IP logs, booking confirmations, email creation timestamps, chat screenshots. I laid them on the coffee table with surgical precision. This, I said, is not a misunderstanding. Nate leaned in and paled. Tara stared at the documents as if they were venomous. Lorraine spoke first, slow, deliberate, weaponized in the way only a practiced manipulator could manage. You're embarrassing us, Evelyn. No, I said. You embarrassed yourselves when you stole from me. She flinched at the word, stole, but I didn't sugarcoat it. Truth should never be diluted to protect pride. I continued. You used my financial information without consent. You created a fake email. You impersonated an authorized user. You attempted to bypass verification. And then you expected gratitude. Tara's jaw tightened. We were going to pay you back. With what? I asked. Your history doesn't show the ability or the intention. Her face reddened. Nate snapped, You're cold. That's your problem. You don't know how families help each other. You and your spreadsheets. You think money is everything. And with a steady voice, I answered. Money isn't everything. But honesty is. Silence. Then Michael stepped forward, voice low but firm. You put my wife in the position of having to defend herself against a crime you committed. If the bank chose to press charges, this would be felony-level fraud. Tara sank onto the couch, stunned. Lorraine covered her mouth. Nate muttered something under his breath. I spoke again, not with bitterness, but with resolution. I'm giving you a choice. All eyes lifted. Either we agree on restitution and boundaries today, in writing, witnessed by Michael, or we allow the bank to proceed with the full investigation, which will almost certainly end in charges. Lorraine gasped. You wouldn't ruin our family like that. You already did, I said softly. Then I placed a document on the table, a simple repayment agreement, not for the whole $32,000, since the charges had been reversed, but for the processing fees, the investigation fees, and the replacement of compromised accounts. Modest. Ethical. Fair. Tara signed first, hands visibly shaking. Nate signed next. Lorraine hesitated, searching for emotional leverage, but found none. She signed. Then I gathered the papers, placed them in my folder, and ended the meeting with a single sentence. Trust is rebuildable. But only if the truth is respected. And I walked out. In the weeks that followed, consequences unfolded, not because I demanded them, but because truth naturally reshapes the people it touches. First, the bank completed their investigation. Because all charges had already been reversed and I had chosen not to pursue criminal claims, they closed the case with a formal warning placed on the accounts associated with the fraudulent activity. It wouldn't send anyone to jail, but it would follow them in future credit checks. Second, the travel agency filed an internal fraud alert. Tara was blacklisted from making large bookings without in-person verification. A quiet, administrative consequence, but one that would complicate her future grand plans. Third, word spread, gently, discreetly, among extended relatives. Not from me, but from the nature of small-town whispers. The story arrived twisted, diluted, embellished by the time it reached distant cousins, but the core remained intact. They had used my credit card for a luxury vacation. I found out. Justice followed. Fourth, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Michael set firm boundaries with his siblings, financial and emotional. He refused to be the fixer anymore. And without his unquestioning support, their patterns lost power. Fifth, and perhaps most surprising, was Tara's eventual apology. It came in the form of a letter. Handwritten. Uneven, emotional. She admitted she'd been jealous of my stability. She admitted she thought I wouldn't notice. She admitted she assumed Michael would smooth it over. She admitted she felt entitled because family should help each other, but she never asked whether she deserved such help. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't immediate. But it was real. Sixth, restitution came. Slowly, in monthly payments. Not because I needed the money, but because they needed the accountability. And finally, something changed inside me too, not hardness, but clarity. I learned which relationships were genuine. I learned the quiet strength of truth whispered calmly. I learned that ethical boundaries are not walls, they are guardrails that keep dignity intact. I didn't ruin the family. I helped reveal its fractures so they could stop pretending they weren't there. But I also learned something about myself. Even at 63, I still had the ability to protect my peace without compromising my integrity. And that, more than anything, was the most powerful consequence of all. Looking back now, months later, I can speak of it without tension in my chest. I can sit in my garden, pruning roses again, knowing my accounts are secure. Knowing the boundaries are firm. Knowing Michael stands beside me not out of obligation, but out of shared principle. When people ask me how I remained so calm, I tell them the truth. Revenge does not require cruelty. Sometimes the sharpest form of justice is simply revealing reality. My husband's family expected me to be passive, compliant, or perhaps too old to notice financial manipulation. They underestimated the power of quiet intelligence. But justice is not loud. Truth is not theatrical. Ethical revenge is not delivered in rage, it is delivered in documentation, boundary setting, and unwavering self-respect. What I learned through this ordeal is something I hope others hear clearly. If someone takes from you money, trust, or dignity, you don't have to destroy them to restore yourself. You simply have to stand firm in the truth. And if they attempt to twist guilt or emotional ties to justify their actions, remember. Boundaries are not betrayal. Accountability is not cruelty. And protecting your peace is not selfishness, it is survival. I didn't scream. I didn't insult. I didn't humiliate. I just revealed what was already true. And when truth finally speaks, it has a way of rearranging everything. If you've ever had someone overstep your boundaries, especially financially, I'd love to hear your story. How did you handle it? What did you learn? Tell me in the comments, your voice might help someone else find theirs.